All right, so we can sit up tall. We can just ground ourselves just for a moment, then we'll begin. So relaxing the shoulders, can allow the eyes to close, can allow the belly to let go, can allow the mind to relax, allow the face to relax. Just tap into the heartbeat in the chest. Feel that heartbeat extend through the arms and through the legs. Just become aware of the entire body pulsating. Become aware of the breath. And we'll just take 3 deep inhales. So inhale through the nose, fill your low belly first, then your mid belly, and then your upper chest, and then hold the breath when you're full. Let go. Chest first, mid belly, low belly, squeeze the air out. Squeeze all the air out. Inhale, low belly, mid belly, upper chest. Hold at the top. Let go. Squeeze all the air out. One last time, inhale 3 parts. And let go. We'll take a deep inhale through the nose. And let a sigh out of the mouth. We'll try that one more time. Deep inhale. And then let a sigh out. Can join the palms together. We'll just say our mantras. I won't put them in the chat. I apologize. I don't have them on hand. But if you know them, you can say them with me, or else you can just listen. Om Higyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Just bowing the head to honor the soul, honor the spirit within the heart, and that of all living entities. Okay. Grateful to be with you guys, ladies. Sherry, welcome. I don't think I've seen your face in here. I think you just joined recently, but hopefully you were able to kind of get caught up on the intro, and if not, you can watch it after this so you have a little bit more context, but grateful to have you here.
Thank you.
Okay, you guys ready to jump in? So I kind of set the scene of the Gita. Obviously, Arjun is on the battlefield with Krishna, and Sanjay is overlooking the scene and narrating to Dhritarashtra, who is the blind father of the Kurus, or of the Kauravas, who want to take over the kingdom, who want to take over rule of earth, basically. And we really went through all of chapter 1 last week, and I tried my best to go through it all in a way that made sense, but basically it was setting the scene. It gave kind of a view of the warriors on both sides of the battle. It gave a view of Dhritarashtra's blindness to the fact that he has committed to something that is going to cause suffering to everybody. And he was so steeped in his own false ego that he refused to give up his desire to take over the kingdom, even though he knew that ultimately his family would lose and everybody would lose from this war. And so really what I highlighted for all of you last class was the power of ignorance. The power of ignorance. One, just the sort of blind ignorance, literally, metaphorically, in all sense of the word, that Dhritarashtra displays. And then in another sense, the sort of ignorance displayed by a person who is trying to be spiritual. And that is Arjuna's ignorance. So towards the end of the chapter, we went over all the different ways that Arjuna was resisting doing his duty, right? We kind of gave a layout of that. We all have a particular duty in this world. The duty of a warrior is to protect the innocent, to uphold dharma, to uphold the principles of truth and righteousness, and all these things. And that is exactly the scenario Arjuna was in. And yet he allowed different levels of rationalization, which I explained. Rationalization is intelligence in service of the false ego, right? Whatever the false ego wants, whatever the false ego wants to defend, we use rationalization as an extremely powerful tool to defend our position and to defend our ignorance, right? To stay stuck, to stay where we're at, to not have to change, to not have to step up and fight and be truthful, be honest, be all those things. And he gave a lot of different, very compelling arguments like, well, there's going to be no benefit to this. Well, there's going to be no enjoyment to this. Well, it'll produce bad karma for me. Well, it'll destroy the kingdom. And when the kingdom's destroyed, I gave you that layout of how enlightened rulers really set the tone for society. And there was kind of like some social commentary towards the end, which I told you about, that Krishna's kind of stirring up this social commentary so that he can segue into what he really wants to speak about in this moment, which is karma yoga, which is how to be in society while having very, very high spiritual ideals that you live by. So he's kind of setting the scene by kind of speaking about the social landscape of India 5,000 years ago, and how when there's enlightened rulers, everybody can prosper. But when there's not enlightened rulers, which actually I was just hearing in another class today, the false ego of just a few men, how much destruction that's caused in the world. The false pride of a few men with military access to military power, how much death that's caused, right? How much suffering that's caused. Just a few men who want to defend their ego so badly that they're willing to have millions of people killed on their behalf with no principles of dharma to be seen anywhere in the equation. And so kind of Arjuna focuses on that argument for a while, and he says, when the dynasty is destroyed, then traditions are destroyed. When traditions are destroyed, then traditions cannot be passed down to the next generation of the family. When traditions are not passed down to the next generation of the family, then ultimately unenlightened men exploit this world. And when unenlightened men exploit this world, then women kind of also have to become exploitative in one sense. And then what happens is there's a lot of unwanted population, which I explained that most of the children that are born into the world are not premeditated conceptions or pregnancies. They're not wanted before the pregnancy actually happens. And then basically what happens is just this kind of cycle of spiraling away from principle to the point where we're at now, where I think some people are beginning to see that the whole liberal thing of like no guidelines whatsoever is not working either. And like no foundation of what is right and what is true, just like anything kind of goes, that's not working either. And that's extremely problematic too, and just kind of another end of the spectrum. But he's kind of giving this as an argument. So this is basically where we're at. And the theme of chapter 1 was Arjuna Vishada Yoga, which means Arjuna's yoga of dejection. That ultimately suffering and tribulation can be such a powerful catalyst for us to come closer to divinity and come closer to truth and come closer to ourselves. Most of us try to avoid it because we place a very high value on emotional happiness, but there wasn't that landscape of placing happiness on such a high pedestal in the past in like a just purely emotional sense. Does all that make sense? I'm just kind of setting the scene from the first two classes. All right, so we're going to go through the first few, like, hopefully we'll get through the first 10 verses of chapter 2. And of course, any questions you guys have along the way, you can just raise a hand, unmute the mic, etc. But we're going to jump in, okay? So if you have it open, you can read along, or else I just will read it. We'll do the first few verses. So Sanjay said, right? So Sanjay is narrating this whole thing. Seeing Arjuna full of compassion, his mind depressed, his eyes full of tears, Madhusudan, Krishna, spoke the following words. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, or aka Krishna said, "My dear Arjun, how have these impurities come upon you? They are not at all befitting a man who knows the value of life. They lead not to higher planets, but to infamy." And then he says, "O son of Pratha, do not yield to this degrading impotence. It does not become you. Give up such petty weakness of heart and arise, O chastiser of the enemy." Okay, so this is pretty much Krishna like rebuking Arjun for his like emotional outburst at the end of chapter 1. All the different rationalizations that are not befitting a man of justice and duty and of high character. He's just basically saying like, he's rebuking Arjun's emotional outpouring. So this is verses 1 to 3. Then basically verses 4 to 6, Arjuna gets triggered. Okay, so like imagine that, I mean, this happens to all of us, so we can relate with Arjun's story, that we have some position that we create because of fear or ignorance. And when someone kind of calls us out on that position, we can either do the humble thing and concede and like take the high road, or we can like double down on our previous like arguments, which kind of always gets ugly and is always like not very cute, but it's kind of our knee-jerk reaction anyway. It's like, okay, like I really gotta defend my position because now I'm being seen. I'm being seen in my unenlightened side. Okay, so that's pretty much what's happening these next few verses. So verse 4, Arjuna said, "O killer of enemies, O killer of Madhu, how can I counteract with arrows in battle men like Bhishma and Drona who are worthy of my worship? It would be better to live in this world by begging than to live at the cost of lives of great souls who are my teachers. Even though desiring worldly gain, they are my superiors. If they are killed, everything we enjoy will be tainted with blood. Nor do we know which is better, conquering them or being conquered by them. If we killed the sons of Dhritarashtra, we should not care to live, yet they are now standing before us on the battlefield." Okay, so he's kind of like investing in all the reasons, like, how can I attack people who I looked up to at one point, right? It would be better to live in this world by begging than to attack people who were my teachers. And even though the hearts of my teachers may have become corrupted and polluted, still I kind of worship them. Right? If they're killed, everything's going to be tainted with blood. Right? How can I enjoy? Let's see what you said. What page are we on? I'm not finding it. We're on we're on chapter 2, verse 4, 5, 6. Okay. All right. So there's a few things happening here. This is Krishna's rebuke, verses 1 to 3. And very strategically, different names of Krishna are used throughout the whole entire Gita. So you'll see, "O Madhusudan, O Bhagavan, O Krishna, O killer of the Keshi," like all these different names of Krishna, which have very subtle meanings to them. And so this verse, it says Madhusudan. Arjuna is calling, or Krishna is being called Madhusudan. And Madhu means sweet. So you who are full of sweetness, please destroy my sudana, which means my lamentation. Oh, my sweet friend, please help me destroy that lamentation that I'm experiencing. So basically what is happening here is Krishna's initial response is that Arjuna's processing of the situation at hand is nothing but an emotional outpouring that's not really worthy of a lot of his time, right? Why is that? Because basically what he is experiencing is that statements informed by ignorance. Like if someone who you hold in a very high regard is just kind of in a very emotional state and they say something that's just very not aligned and out of ignorance, you don't feed into that so much. You're just like, hey, like, come on, like snap out of it. Like, what's going on with you? And Krishna also understands that that kind of emotional bewilderment that's Arjuna's experiencing in the name of ignorance is the same ignorance that informs much worse behavior in this world. So pretty much anyone's any bad acts, any atrocious acts is informed by the same ignorance that Arjuna is experiencing in this situation. And then he uses this word anarya ajustam in the Sanskrit. And so Arya, this is a term, of course, Hitler, he had some understanding of the Sanskrit language and the power of Sanskrit. And he, of course, utilized particular symbols from Hinduism and terms from Hinduism and really perverted them because he knew the power of different words. So for instance, one of those things is the swastika, and he took the traditional swastika from Hinduism and he turned it a little bit sideways. And then he used that as the, emblem for his movement of hatred. But originally it's a symbol of peace and prosperity and of deep meaning to it. And so in the same way, he used this term Arya, but Arya means one who's actually interested in enlightenment, one who's actually dedicated to not allowing their emotions to come before their duty. That is anarya ajustam. He says, like, this is not befitting someone who is interested in enlightenment, because one who is interested in enlightenment will put truth and divinity and dharma before they place their emotional reality. Now, of course, it's difficult and there needs to be actual processes by which one can do that, because our emotional realities are many times very compelling. They're very compelling and they paint a very vivid picture. But what Krishna is explaining here is that those emotional states are unpredictable and just manifest due to different karmas. Like sometimes you just wake up and you're like so like really sad or like frustrated or like whatever, like different things are triggering different emotional states in us all the time. And so it's Krishna's basically like kind of just waiting for his dear friend to snap out of this. And so then Krishna basically uses this other term. Krishna says it's grounded on Hridaya Dur Balyam. So Hridaya means the heart and Balya means strength. So weakness of heart. Dur Balyam means without strength. You have a weak heart. And I gave that example last week of the police officer who shows up to your house because you're being robbed or someone is being hurt in your house. And the police officer is like, I'm just going to chill out here and do my meditation. And, maybe your attacker will just kind of go away on his own. And then like, I don't have to like go into some violent conflict. It is a weakness of heart that causes one to not step up to the plate and do their duty when there's immense pressure, right? So Krishna is kind of using this different language to highlight Arjuna's weakness. And he understood that Arjuna's cowardliness was not based on a lack of courage, but proper judgment around what was to be done and not done, and how to apply the principle of compassion. You guys get that? When we misapply compassion, Like, for instance, there's a few moral principles. I mean, there's many moral principles, but one of them is truth. We could say that truth the highest principle? What do you guys think? Yes or no? Is there anything that's more important than truth? Okay, raise your hand if you think truth is the most important. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, we got like a convincing, like I saw like some psychological group think happen there, where it was like one person was very, firm about it, and then other people were like, well, I don't want to be wrong, so I'm going to raise my hand too. So let's give you this scenario then to test out. Let's say you're uh, in a different era, born in a different era, and you are hiding Jews in your house. And someone comes to your door, an SS officer, and they knock on your door and they say, are there any Jews in your house? Is truth still the highest principle? Compassion. Compassion is the highest, right? It could like be like, well, I have to be truthful, right? And that's virtuous. But truth, when it causes unnecessary harm, is not rightly applied truth. So in the same sense, Arjuna is misapplying compassion here. He's applying compassion. Imagine there's like a reckless invading army that just wants to like destroy everything that you know and love. And he's like, well, I don't want to hurt anybody. But it's like, they're coming. They're going to hurt people. What is compassion in that scenario? To lay down your weapon or to fight? Right? So he's misapplying compassion. And this is the highlighting of Arjuna's ignorance, that even in the name of spirituality, many people ignorantly apply principles of spirituality. Because Dharma is considered like a blade, and a blade should be used very carefully. And a blade should be used according to time and circumstance. So there's not just one way at all times to do these principles. Okay, you guys got this so far? Making sense? Okay, so then basically Krishna calls out this problem, and it's a problem we all have. The defect of analysis that's informed by emotional bewilderment, as opposed to a dispassionate adherence to truth. Right? Analysis of our life based on emotional state versus analysis of our life based on a dispassionate, which means not a neutral adherence to truth. Right? Which one of these two is better? Many of us, we place a very high level of importance on our emotional reality, and it becomes us. But it actually was never really the norm. Just now it's becoming a norm. And I think there is definitely some validity to that, right? Like there's a tremendous amount of trauma, there's a tremendous amount of dysregulation, all these different things that are happening. Like it's not to discount any of that, but another way to give this example, which this may not be the exact best example, but for instance, is someone who uses pot. And then you ask them, oh, well, why do you smoke that all the time? Well, it's a medicine. But shouldn't good medicine get you to a state of health by which then you do not need a medicine? Right? Like, or else if you just want to perpetually stay in that state and use something as a crutch, I think that's how many of us use traumas and emotional kind of realities that we've created for ourselves as stories that we can use as crutches, so that we don't actually have to step up to the truth and fully face ourselves. Right? Viktor Frankl, who was a Holocaust survivor, he said actually man's suffering comes from his inability to sit with himself in a quiet room. And that is our inability. The emotional turmoil, we are buying into it way too much, and it creates a very strong narrative. And it's a very compelling narrative too. I'm not denying that. It happens to me too. But there has to be some level of healthy acknowledgement as the observer. The observer, you are the observer, right? That's why you can say, I am thinking. Who's I? Right? Who's I? Who's the one having the thought? The thought is separate from the I, or else there would be no ability to distinguish between the two. And so to create that is fitting of an Aryan, is fitting of an enlightened person. To create that space between stimulus and response is yoga, right? That is sattva. If someone is in tamas or rajas and these very reactive states of being, there is no space between stimulus and response. Something happens, immediate reaction. Something happens, immediate avoidance. Something happens, immediate desire. We're controlled by an immediate grip that the mind puts on an object as good or bad, and then we are immediately impelled to act. That is rajas and tamas. Sattva creates space. Sattva, which means a consciousness in the mode of goodness, pervaded by truth, pervaded by spaciousness and clarity. That sattvic consciousness creates a space between a stimulus and our response. And in between those two things, the intellect or the buddhi can actually activate. This is the science of buddhi yoga that Krishna will begin to speak about soon. This is like Krishna setting the scene for all these other things that he's going to speak about. When the emotional reality predominates in such a strong way, there's no space between a stimulus in your life and the response you give in your life. And therefore, there's no time for your deeper faculties of intelligence or buddhi to actually activate and inform your response. Does this make sense? Anybody ever experienced this before? Okay, we got a few enlightened people in here who didn't raise their hand. I've definitely experienced it. Other people like stoic, like, what you talking about, Yamuna? I never experienced that. I'm always equipoise and making the best decisions. Like, I'm definitely not. I'm definitely compelled by my emotions many times. And it doesn't always provide the best fruits, because those decisions are informed by attachment and aversion, which ultimately will lead to more bondage in this world. So Arjuna wasn't interested in dharma or what is right or true, but rather what feels good. And this is most of us. We'd rather do what feels good than what is true and what is right. We'd rather do what feels good mentally, emotionally, physically, than really do what we know is true and what is right. So this verse is quoted from Bhagavad Gita 7:7. It's a great verse if you want to learn verses from the Gita. Chapter 7, verse 7. Icha dvesha samutena dvandva mohana bharata sarva bhutani samoham sargayante parantapaha. This says, "O conqueror of the foe, all living entities are born into delusion, bewildered by dualities arisen from desire and hate." So we're all born into some level of delusion, and we're all consistently bewildered by dualities that arise from I like, which is icha, and I don't like, dvesha. And we call happiness when we get what we're attached to, and we call sadness when we get what we're not attached to, or we don't get what we're attached to. Right? And even Ayurveda starts this whole treatise from this verse. It says, Ragadi Rogan Shatutan Shaktan Ashashakaya Prashitan Sheshan Atsukya Maharaditan Jaganha Yopurva Vaidyaya Namostu Tasmai. This is from Ashtanga Hridayam. Sutra 1.1. So this is like setting the whole scene for Ayurvedic medical science. And it says obeisances to that unique and rare physician. So obeisances means my respects to that rare physician, that unique physician who completely eliminates limitless diseases that are always bothering the living entities. The body, the mind of the living entities, perpetually causing anxiety, confusion, restlessness. And it says these diseases include attachment and aversion and all their various transformations. So it recognizes that the root of any disease is ultimately attachment and aversion. This icha and dvesha. Because it is actually an unnatural state for the Satchidananda soul, for the soul that's very composition is bliss. For the soul whose very composition is bliss to come in contact with anxiety and to attachment and aversion, that attachment and aversion transmutes itself, transforms itself into limitless types of disease. Technically 14,400 that are described within Ayurveda. Right? Does this make sense so far? Okay, I get some blank stares, a few half nods. We're doing good. That's higher than I expect. I'm just kidding. So next, Arjuna's mental inertia is again displayed. So this is 2.456 right here. So Krishna like calling him out like, hey man, like snap out of it. This is not fitting you. This is not who you are. This is not befitting to a person who's pursuing enlightenment. It wasn't enough for Arjuna to snap out of it. Because the emotional turmoil was very high, Arjuna just doubled down on his arguments, which if you've ever spoken to an emotional person and you've tried to refute one of their points, they generally just say the same thing again. Because there's a high emotional state where the mind becomes to the state of what's called mental inertia. Mental inertia means you can only move in the same pattern and direction as before. It's a state of disease in Ayurveda, where the mind can only move in the same patterns over and over. And we see people like that, attract the same abusive people into their life, can't quit different substances. The mind is in a mental inertia. It's running on the same programs over and over. Everything's against me. Everything's through the lens of victimhood. Everything's the same. Everything is always against me. It's a mental inertia. It's a mental inertia. Okay. So let's see. You can take a deep breath in. So this kind of deeper thing is happening here. And this whole verses 1 through 10 is really giving us a deeper insight into Guru. That is what this first 10 verses is about. That is the kind of, I don't want to say hidden because it's kind of right there in the obvious, but what is happening now in this verses 4 and 5, Krishna says, if you don't want the kingdom, how will you live? Right? And Arjuna says, I'll just live by begging, even though it's not befitting like a kingly person like me. It is better that I beg. Right? So there's this verse from the Mahabharata that says one should reject the guru, any guru who is proud, who does not know proper etiquette, or who becomes engaged in things that are not according to Dharma. That guru should be rejected. And so these elders and teachers that he is lamenting about having to face in battle are people who fall in this category of people who gave up Dharma because they were swayed by money. They were swayed by the wealth of the Kauravas, and they decided to fight Arjuna and Krishna because of the wealth of someone else. So he says they're great souls. But just because one has a great past, one shouldn't rest on their laurels. And I find myself doing this too, right? Like I lived as a monk for many years, and like it's a cool card to flash or whatever, but it's like I can't rest on that. How am I living now? Should I not be more advanced than before? Should I not be more deep than before? Should I not be progressing deeper in my life than before? I can't rest on, oh, what great things and what great service and what amazing ways I've helped people in the past, right? So I could like hurt a bunch of people, and that would be, the proof is in the pudding, right? Like that's the proof of my character. And so the character of his teachers was completely tainted. So although he had some affection for them, one should not maintain affection for previous teachers if they've become very against the principles of truth. So he was kind of like in this awkward position, right? Like imagine someone you loved, like imagine Arjuna's position by imagining your father or your mother or someone you trusted and loved who brought you up and taught you everything, just did some like super horrible stuff. Imagine like shot up a school, someone that like brought you up and taught you. Some part of you, if they've been a part of your life in such a positive way for so long, some part of you will still want to really love and accept that person. It's not avoidable, no matter how bad a thing someone does, which is also a reason why, for instance, victims of domestic violence, they stay with their partner. Even they get separated and whatever, they go back. There is some cycle created there. Victims of child abuse, different things like that, they still have that deep need for the acceptance of that parent, and they go back. So this emotional reality creating our own suffering. This is intense topics, I know. It's intense. Arjuna is facing a very intense situation. It's not just a story. It is our story. It is the human story. So his teachers became tainted by unmoral activities and by promise of great money. Like we think that we're immune to these kind of things, right? Like imagine if someone offered you like $1 billion, which we don't even fathom 1,000 million, right? Like most of us can't fathom 1 million. What to speak of 1,000 times $1 million? Someone was like, just help me do this one messed up thing, and I will literally wire you $1 billion. Most of us like to think like, oh, nah, man, like I'm dedicated to truth, like I got this. Like, for instance, like I'm not picking any political side or anything, but when Trump, for instance, was in power, like I even caught myself like, I'd make a better president, like whatever. It's like, but you don't know until you are in that power. Like imagine you were the president tomorrow. Power in and of itself is not bad, but it really catalyzes whatever's in your heart. So if you have things in your heart that you haven't looked at, those things will be brought to light through the greater the power, the greater the money, the greater whatever, it's an amplifier. Right? So many of the times people believe like, oh, money pollutes people, power pollutes people, whatever it is. No, their pollution is just getting amplified. It's just like holding a microphone up to it. A dead president on a piece of paper can't pollute somebody. It's not an alive thing, right? Okay, so does this make sense? This is his teachers were kind of swayed by this great force of wealth and all these things that are very tempting. And so that guru should be rejected. Okay. Let's see. Okay, moving on. Verse 6, we'll just finish here. We'll go through a few more verses. It says, nor do we know which is better, conquering them or being conquered by them. If we killed the sons of Dhritarashtra, we should not care to live, yet they are now standing before us on the battlefield. Now I'm confused about my duty and have lost all composure because of miserly weakness. In this condition, I am asking you to tell me for certain what is best for me. Now I am your disciple and a soul surrendered unto you. Please instruct me. So this is a critical part in the spiritual journey, is when one gets to a stage where they actually have to give themselves to another who is much more advanced than them, so that they can deal with the perplexing situations of existence. We have this kind of very individualistic outlook on life, that I can just do everything by myself. But if you want to excel at anything, you need a teacher. If you want to excel at spiritual science, which is one of the most complex sciences that exist, you definitely need a teacher. And one can argue, this is a big turning point in the Gita, but one can argue, well, don't we already have everything within us? Isn't all truth existing within me? Isn't God in my heart? Can I just, look within and find truth? Absolutely. But to uncover that guru within, one needs someone outside of yourself to help you uncover the guru within. There's a very nice saying that I like to quote all the time because I think it's kind of funny. But it says, one who accepts their mind as guru accepts a fool for a disciple. And so I really like that one. If you think about it, if you accept your mind as your guru, right? My mind is always telling me this and that and so many great ideas, and I'm a very obedient disciple. But it says, one who accepts their mind as guru accepts a fool for a disciple. Because that's just nature. The nature is I'm illusioned, my senses are faulty, I'm subject to committing mistakes, I'm subject to selfishness. It is just the current of material existence that's the fabric. And for me to access that truth, that reality beyond that pole of material existence takes tremendous grace, takes tremendous effort, takes outside help. If one wants to cross an ocean, one cannot swim on their own. But if there's the guru who has the boat, why wouldn't you take it? Now I understand there's so much pressure these days there's so much pressure against subjecting ourselves to any sort of religious concept. And I myself felt like that for many, many years. I was raised in Islam. Anything religious to me was like, nah, not gonna do that. So I get it. Like the idea of subjecting oneself to authority is very different. The idea of subjecting oneself to a guru is very different from our Western conception of what is best, right? I know what is best at all times for me. That's fine if you want to be an average, worldly, materialistic person. But if one wants to really get rid of greed and lust and envy and anger and pride, one needs a spiritual scientist. One needs that spiritual doctor we were speaking about who can cut out those impurities without cutting out the heart. And that requires relationship. There's so much nuance that we're seeing in just a few verses, that the guru who doesn't have good character, who is not living in accordance with truth or these principles, all that type of guru should definitely be rejected. So subjecting oneself to a teacher does not mean a blind adherence to someone with a beard that like looks very cool. And then you can just like Instagram it and say, I have a guru or whatever. But it is a deep period of observation and you qualifying yourself, right? Like, has anyone here watched The Karate Kid? Okay, almost everyone has watched The Karate Kid. But basically the premise is he wants to learn from a master. And what does that master have him do? Wax on, wax off, wax on, wax off. And that is the testing of the disciple. That is the menial service attitude that is required for knowledge to be transferred. We don't have that in America. We don't have, like, even in Colombia here, there's like a respect for authority. There's like a respect for teachers. Like, I haven't emailed a single one of my teachers from college since I left. I haven't like really even thought of them. But there was this very high regard because these people were of very high standard. So the Karate Kid like did all this menial stuff and he got frustrated and his ego flared up and all these different things happened. And the guru just kind of smiled, right? Like, ah, yes, yes, I see you. And that is actually one who can help us go through that process is actually our best friend, because most people will not be willing to sit with us in our worst. Most people will not be willing to push us to bring the best out of us. We generally surround ourselves with people who are at a similar level of determination, similar goals in life, and who accept the same things as true and as false, and as socially acceptable. And to have someone at a dramatically higher standard is confronting. That's how I felt when I met my guru. Just like immediate confrontation. And not even from anything spoken, from unspoken. I just felt seen in such a way that was very revealing. And that I felt like all the nasty stuff in my heart was visible. And also all the good in my heart was visible. And it was so uncomfortable. It was like someone like peering into my entire existence and seeing me. And no one has ever seen me before like that. Not my closest friends, nobody has looked into my existence like that. And I was so uncomfortable. I hadn't cried in years. And I was brought to tears in that moment, in just a few moments of looking at my spiritual teacher. And immediately they embraced me. And that feeling of being claimed when someone sees all the worst in you and all the best in you, sees all of you and claims you, that is deep trust. That is the most profound love one can experience. When I had a near-death experience, I saw all my family and friends in a room with me. This was when I was 17. I haven't told anybody this online, but I saw all my friends and family in front of me. And I saw how for each of them, I wore a different mask. I saw how there was a certain level of facade in order to get the love that I needed from each of them. And it was so ugly to me. Not that that principle in and of itself is bad, because everyone wants love, but that I had to be this split person, slightly different versions of me to each person, without noticing that I was doing it. It took the death experience to show it. The only person who is really whole is the saint. the saint who has unified all parts of the mind and the ego. Until then, we have different parts of our identity pulling us, and we can't actually be that man that Viktor Frankl says can sit in a room with himself and just sit with himself. And so Arjuna is brought to this point of greatest intensity. And after many times of rationalization, he is relieved that someone is holding up a mirror to his rationalization. We don't have many people in our lives that will do that for us. And he finally says, I need help. And just like that Karate Kid, wax on, wax off, he had to go through that humbling, because in order for something of a greater nature to come down to something of a lesser nature, there has to be humility. In order for knowledge to descend, there has to be humility. It's like, if here's a full glass and here's your 1/10 filled glass, one glass has to come lower, right? For that other glass to transfer itself. And so in the same way, one has to develop humility, which means putting oneself lower, not in like a abuse me way, or not in a, I'm worthless way, but in a, I need help, which we think generally that means there's something wrong with us. But it is the greatest asset to have humility, to say something like that and to embody that. It's humility. Humility means to be truthful. And the truth is, we all need help. So this is Arjuna humbling himself. He says, I can find no means to drive away this grief, which is drying up my senses. I will not even be able to dispel it, even if I win a prosperous kingdom on earth with sovereignty like the demigods in heaven. Sanjaya said, having spoken thus, Arjuna, chastiser of enemies, told Krishna, Govinda, I shall not fight, and fell silent. So this is this section that Arjuna realizes that Krishna, who he had just been seeing as a friend, now became his greatest well-wisher. And in order for him to really benefit fully from that relationship, he had to take the position of a student. And that position takes humility. And there's so much else to it. And yeah, I guess I'll stop there, because I want to hear what you guys are thinking. What have you gotten so far? What are a question that you have? Because it's actually a very deep topic, the idea of guru. And there's a lot of cheating gurus out there. There's a lot of fake gurus out of there. There's a lot of exploitative leaders out there. There's a lot of exploitative spiritual figures out there. And so I get that there's this fabric of mistrust. But there has to be some truth out there. And there have to be people who are living that truth out there. Or else there's no hope in existence, right? There's no lighthouse to guide the boat ashore. So part of universal love, part of God's love, part of Krishna's love is that there will always be those people, even though very rare in this world, who can act as that lighthouse. And it is the spiritual adventurer's duty to seek out that lighthouse. And so wherever we are in our journey, our sincerity will be that guiding compass. Even if we have not yet identified that lighthouse, our sincerity, deep sincerity. And people are like, how do I know I'm sincere? Just sit with yourself for a moment. For me, it becomes very apparent in about 2 seconds how insincere I am, and where I am sincere. I want to hear from you all because I just spoke a lot. What are you thinking, feeling? What didn't you like about what I just said? What did you like? Questions you have? Or we can just blankly stare at each other and be impersonal, and I'll just speak at a computer with nobody responding.
I like everything that you said.
Thank you. That's very nice for my ego. Now, what anything triggered you? Anything rubbed you the wrong way? Any question you have that you want to go deeper in?
No, I don't think anything triggered me. I feel like it it all just felt very, very true. And yeah, it just brought up a lot of contemplation around, like, times in my life and places in my life recently where I've chosen like belonging and comfort over over truth and over my commitment to that,
Mm-hmm.
and chosen not to be rejected over my commitment to that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's deep. The ways that untruth makes itself so appealing
Mhm.
and comforting. And it's like a nice hiding in the blankets on a rainy day. It's a place that we found solace in the past, but we don't know that there's a reality outside that can provide substantially more comfort. Which, because the truth, I may have shared this here before, but when you tell a lie and you're like a little kid and your mom is like kind of onto you because moms know everything and they're really smart and stuff. As soon as your mom is onto you, you have to think of more complex lie to cover up your first lie. And of course, you're like 7, so your intelligence is like super puny compared to your mom. And like it becomes more and more anxiety inducing to cover up different lies. Whereas if you tell the truth, there's nothing else to say. The truth is self-sustaining. And so that is really the process of embodiment and the process of yoga, where one can actually be situated in truth, not swayed by material energy. And there's nothing to defend. Then one can actually be peaceful. And when one is peaceful, one can actually be happy. But because we have such a split mind, a split identity, and not a lackluster adherence to truth, not a very deep spiritual practice, we're feeling the pull from all different forces, and we're not able to be peaceful. We're not able to be sustainably happy. So the Gita is giving the equation for happiness, but most of us are okay without it. But even a little bit of progress can be tremendous. That's what I'm banking on, at least. Right? I may not become, what my goal is in this life as far as my spiritual goals, but if I'm dedicated, like one who knows the road to a place, even though the place may be far away, If you're on the road, there's solace. So I feel that solace increasing more and more in my life. The more I go into my practices, there's solace being on the road, even though I'm far from the place I want to be. And there's people who have walked that road, told me how it is. There's people who have gotten to the end that I know, that I've observed in every possible way I know how, and seen their character and observed them. And tens of thousands of people have observed them. And it's all checked out. And those are my guides. Anybody else? Sherry, what are you feeling? This is your first time in the live session, so I gotta call you out.
Well, I attend IshCon Columbus on Thursdays, and when they have special events. And one of the things that they talk about, a lot is preaching, chanting, and reading, and often just on what you were talking about with the guru. When I do preach, I don't know. I kind of feel sometimes I feel I don't want to say weird, or I know I need to fill my cup up, and I know I do need a guru, so that I can do that effectively. So I liked what you were talking about with the guru.
It's very attractive to take the place of the guru, myself included. Like, I love teaching. There's a certain level that my ego is involved in this. And then there's a certain part of me where I'm genuinely want to serve, and I genuinely want to represent my teachers and my gurus. And like, to the extent that I'm living what I say, it will be effective. It will go into your ears and it will make a lasting impression. If I'm not saying anything, like if I just gave Martin Luther King's I have a dream speech, I wouldn't like make tens of thousands of people cry. It's because he's living it in such a deep level that it's filled with realization. It's the words are like, in one sense, like impregnated with meaning and depth and potency. Whereas I can just say things and they can be empty shells of words, even though they're the same ideas and concepts. And so really, when you say the word preach, the Sanskrit word, like for me, like my mind's like a little averse to that idea of like preach, but it actually comes from this Sanskrit word called prachar, which means to take what's in the heart and put it outside of oneself. To take what's in the heart and bring it out. And that for me is like, if your heart's not full, if you're not living it, like how much can you do that? Like, put your own oxygen mask on if the plane is crashing, then put other people's oxygen mask on. Right? So one has to be solid in themselves before they can really be of any substantial help. But the whole not being a very fulfilled teacher is very attractive and very popular now. Like, I can just get a few books on Amazon and I can be a guru. And, it's a process. It's an identity that's very attractive for the ego because there's power. But really, I heard this the other day from one of my teachers, that guru is just a student in another seat. The guru is just a student in a different seat. And I really appreciated that. Like, when I teach you guys, of course, I'm a conditioned soul that's not enlightened. So part of my ego is going to be involved in this. But really, I try my best to be in the mood of prayer and remember that I'm just a student passing on what the great gifts my teachers have given me, the great gifts my gurus have given me. And I can say with my own personal realization that I feel genuinely more satisfied and fulfilled now than I ever have in my life. That I feel more solace and a stable ground now than ever in my life before. And I know that if I continue, that will deepen. That will deepen and deepen and deepen. Okay, we're over time. Anybody has to go, please go. Anybody last comments, questions? Would love to hear just a sentence or even just one point you liked from today, then we can sign off.
Arjuna misapplying compassion.
Arjuna misapplying compassion. Yeah, you appreciate that point,
Mm-hmm.
that idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I can relate. You know, I just think of some things in my life where I've done the same thing, where I've had to do something that was right, but I didn't want to because they're a good person. It's you know, give something that happened at work, you know, giving feedback or, you know, telling somebody they're doing something wrong, whatever the case may be. But because they're a good person and I really like them, I don't want to tell them.
Yeah.
So I see that as kind of the same idea. I don't know.
Yeah. Got some work to do.
Just relatable.
Anybody else? Last thing. Claire, any thoughts? Marlena, any last point?
I love the part about, I think I wrote this right, one who accepts their mind as a guru accepts a fool as a disciple. Is that,
Yeah.
I really like that. Because I rejected the concept of a guru for so long. It just was so foreign to me. And so like giving over that sense of authority and like just trusting someone wholly, that they are like a living embodiment of that truth, and that's what, you know, that's the concept. But now, like, just even diving into the Gita with you over the past couple of weeks, like, this is just, my whole perspective has really shifted around, you know, what the true meaning of a guru is, and to have someone outside yourself to be able to provide you with that space and that clarity and that guidance.
Yeah. Actually, the guru, it's a position that shouldn't be sought out by anyone because it's actually a very heavy role to fill. It's very heavy. One of my gurus said, actually, guru means dump truck, because everyone comes and dumps their problems on you. And that is what you have to deal with. And actually, then the whole world becomes your family, and you have so many dependents, and you have so many people to provide for. It's a very heavy responsibility. It's not like I'm the guru and people worship me and like, oh, this is awesome. Like, if someone is feeling like that, they're not a guru. If someone thinks that they're guru, they're not guru. If someone's saying I'm guru, they're not guru. So we had to be careful because there's many people out there. I won't name any, but there's many people out there very popular who have, you know, the look, the accent, and they can just trick people all day into something cheap, sell fool's gold, and make money off of it. So you're right to be doubting, but we shouldn't be doubtful to a fault. Doubt is a function of the intelligence, but overextended doubt is another form of ignorance, because then there's no foundation on which truth can sprout. So doubt is encouraged in the Bhakti tradition, but you should doubt until you find sufficient answers, right? You should be satisfied when you find sufficient answers and not just continue doubting. So yeah, there's so much more to be said, but I'm gonna let you guys go. It's late here. Thank you for tuning in. We will continue the next about 10 verses or so next class, and grateful for your presence. Hope to see you next week. Hariom Tat Sat.